I parked my cheap rental sedan on the curb and stared at the empty concrete where my $150,000 custom Mercedes G-Class was supposed to be. The shock hit me like a physical blow. The heavy rain of Charlotte pounded against my windshield, blurring the streetlights, but it could not blur the undeniable fact that my driveway was entirely vacant. My home security app showed all the cameras were offline. I dialed my father, my hands shaking with a mixture of exhaustion and rising dread. He picked up on the third ring, laughing loudly over the sound of a sports game blaring in the background. "Your sister took it," he sneered, not a single shred of guilt or hesitation in his voice. "She is going to a high-society charity gala tonight to network. She needs it more than a single corporate drone like you." I did not scream. I did not argue. I just felt a pure, icy rage settle deep into my bones, freezing the blood in my veins. "Dad," I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, steady whisper. "Is she driving my vehicle while she is actively on federal probation?" The line went dead silent. The arrogant laughter stopped instantly. I could practically hear the color draining from his face even over the phone as he realized the massive catastrophic error he had just made. I hung up the phone and typed 3 numbers into my keypad. 911. I always thought my home was a fortress. I was about to find out it was just a piggy bank for the people who shared my DNA. If you think turning my own flesh and blood over to the police was harsh, wait until you hear what I discovered she left in my name. The financial rabbit hole I fell into that night will make your blood run cold. But to understand the sheer magnitude of this betrayal, you have to understand the life I had built to escape them. My name is Sloan. I am 30 years old, and I work as a director of supply chain logistics for a massive national retail corporation based in North Carolina. My job is an endless, grueling marathon of high-stakes decision-making. I spend my days analyzing freight costs, optimizing delivery routes across the country, and dealing with hostile vendors. It is a career built on brutal logic, relentless efficiency, and a zero-tolerance policy for errors. I earned my position through 80-hour work weeks, skipped meals, and countless sleepless nights. I am the woman they call when millions of dollars are on the line and the supply chain is breaking down. I am paid extremely well for my stress, and I make zero apologies for the wealth I have accumulated. My house in the upscale suburbs was my sanctuary. It was the only place in the world where I had total control. The silence of my living room was a luxury I bought with my own sweat. And sitting right in front of that house was my ultimate reward. A flawless, heavily customized Mercedes G-Class. I paid $150,000 in cash for that machine. It was imposing, it was powerful, and it was entirely mine. Stepping out of the rental car into the freezing rain, I walked slowly up my driveway. There were faint tire tracks on the wet concrete, backing out in a hurry. The panic was entirely gone now, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I walked around the side of my house to the utility box. The heavy padlock had been cut clean off. Someone had manually flipped the main breaker, killing the power to my Ring doorbell and the floodlight cameras before taking the car. A random thief looking for a quick score does not know where your breaker box is hidden behind the azalea bushes. A random thief smashes a window. This was an inside job. I unlocked my front door manually and stepped into the pitch-black foyer. The air inside felt stale. As I walked past the entryway table, a scent caught my attention. It was faint but entirely unmistakable. The sickly sweet, overpowering stench of cheap vanilla perfume. Kinsley's perfume. I did not bother turning on my phone flashlight. I walked straight through the dark hallway, past the kitchen, and into my home office. I moved a heavy framed painting on the wall and spun the dial on my hidden wall safe. I knew the combination by pure muscle memory. The heavy steel door clicked open. I reached inside for the velvet pouch that held my spare key fob. It was a secondary key I had programmed for $800, meant only for dire emergencies. My fingers grabbed nothing but empty air. The pouch was gone. I stood there in the dark office, staring into the empty safe. My own father had used the house key I gave him for emergencies, walked into my private sanctuary, bypassed my security, and handed my most valuable asset over to my 28-year-old sister. He treated my hard-earned property like a community fund meant to serve the golden child of the family. I clenched my fists until my fingernails dug deep into my palms. How many times was I going to let them steal from me before I finally locked the door forever? Standing in that dark office, staring at the empty metal box, the silence of the house felt suffocating. It was not just the theft of the car that made my chest tight. It was the crushing weight of a lifetime of identical betrayals crashing down on me all at once. People often ask me why I am so guarded, why I keep a hidden safe in my own home, why I refuse to give my family a spare key without a massive fight. The answer is simple. My family history is a museum of pain, and every single exhibit is a reminder that my success is their favorite target. My parents, Roland and Deirdre, ran a small, struggling trucking company. It was an old-school business, built on manual labor and constant stress. They always viewed my corporate career with intense disdain. To them, sitting behind a desk and analyzing data was not real work. Yet, they never hesitated to demand the fruits of that labor. I closed my eyes, leaning my head against the cold wall, and suddenly I was 18 years old again. I was standing in my childhood bedroom, clutching an empty steel lockbox. All through high school, I worked washing greasy dishes in a local diner. My hands were constantly blistered, smelling permanently of old cooking oil. I saved exactly $3,000. It was my entire college freshman housing deposit. It was my only ticket out of a life of paycheck to paycheck misery. I remembered running downstairs, panicked, only to find my mother, Deirdre, calmly sipping her tea. Kinsley needed it, Sloan, my mother had said, not even looking up from her magazine. She got accepted into that elite modeling intensive program in Atlanta. She needs the tuition money to chase her dreams. You're smart, you can just take out a student loan. Kinsley needs a head start. They stole my blood and sweat so Kinsley could pretend to be a model. She quit the program after exactly 2 weeks because waking up at 6 in the morning was too difficult for her. I spent the next 10 years paying off high-interest student loans while Kinsley maxed out my parents' credit cards. The memories kept coming, a toxic flood I could not stop. I remembered the night of my senior corporate gala 3 years ago. I had saved up for months to buy a stunning, tailored designer dress. It was the first time I felt truly beautiful, truly powerful. I left it hanging in my childhood closet while visiting for the holidays. The next morning, I found it shredded on the floor. It was cut into pieces with fabric scissors. Kinsley stood there, filing her nails, looking at me with pure, venomous jealousy. She was deeply in debt, unemployed, and furious that I was thriving. Oh, sweetie, Deirdre had cooed, rushing in to defend her golden child while I stood there holding the ruined silk. Your sister just made a mistake. She was trying to tailor it for you and the scissors slipped. Don't be so dramatic and vindictive. Family is more important than clothes. A mistake. A slip of the scissors that somehow managed to cut straight through the bodice 10 different times. But the ultimate betrayal, the one that forced me to build a literal fortress around my finances, happened 2 years ago. I was in the middle of a massive logistics merger when my phone rang. It was Deirdre, screaming hysterically that Roland was collapsing, clutching his chest, unable to breathe. I dropped everything, risking my career, and raced to the hospital. Roland was sitting in a hospital bed, looking pale and frail. The doctor said it was a severe panic attack, but my parents played the dying act flawlessly. I am not going to be around forever, Sloan, Roland had wheezed, gripping my hand tightly. The trucking business is failing. We have no savings. If my heart gives out, your mother will lose the house. You need to open a joint emergency bank account with me. Just for life or death medical emergencies. Please, daughter. Guilt is the most effective weapon a toxic family possesses. I caved. I opened a joint account and transferred exactly $8,000 of my own money into it. I told myself I was being a good daughter. I told myself it was a safety net for the people who raised me. In return, I foolishly gave Roland the spare key to my new house, explicitly stating it was only to be used if there was a fire or an emergency while I was traveling. Trust in my family does not mean safety. It means an open invitation to be robbed blind while they smile directly to your face. I opened my eyes, the darkness of my home office slowly coming back into focus. The $800 key fob was gone. The car was gone. They had crossed the final, unforgivable line. I walked out of the office and into the kitchen. I turned on the bright overhead lights, fully illuminating the empty house. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It was time to find out exactly where my sister was taking my property. I opened the premium satellite tracking app tied to the G-Class onboard computer. I paid a high monthly fee for the service, and it was worth every single penny. The screen loaded, scanning the local grid. A bright blue dot appeared on the digital map of Charlotte. My heart pounded against my ribs. Kinsley was not parked at a high society charity gala in the upscale district. The blue dot was moving aggressively down Interstate 85. It was traveling at over 100 miles per hour, weaving recklessly through traffic. And its trajectory was perfectly clear. She was heading straight toward the industrial warehouse district on the edge of the county. The exact location of a notorious, underground gambling ring that the police had been trying to shut down for months. She was taking my $150,000 vehicle to a den of criminals. And worse, she was doing it with a federal target on her back. How far were they willing to go to destroy me? I stared at the pulsing blue dot on my phone screen, watching it tear down the interstate at a lethal speed. The sheer audacity of the lie was staggering. A charity gala. Roland had actually expected me to believe that Kinsley, a woman who had never volunteered a single hour of her life for anyone but herself, was out networking with polite society. I hit the redial button for my father. It rang 5 times before he finally answered, sounding incredibly annoyed that I was bothering him during his game. "What now, Sloan?" Roland sighed heavily, his voice dripping with condescension. "I already told you the car is safe. Stop acting like a spoiled brat. You have plenty of money. Let your sister experience a little luxury for one night. She has had a very hard year." "A hard year?" I repeated, my voice eerily calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a devastating storm. "You mean the year she nearly bankrupted your trucking company by committing wire fraud? The year she funneled vendor payments into her own private accounts to buy designer bags?" "Keep your voice down," Roland hissed, the false bravado instantly vanishing. He hated when I brought up the truth. He hated the reality of who his golden child actually was. That was a misunderstanding. She got bad advice from a friend. We handled it internally as a family. "You did not handle it internally, Dad," I corrected him, staring hard at the wall. "The federal government handled it. They audited your company. They dragged her into court. She avoided a 5-year prison sentence by a fraction of an inch. She is turning her life around." Roland yelled, defensive and desperate. "She is engaged to Holden now. She is trying to build a future. She needed a respectable vehicle tonight to impress some investors for a new business venture. You are just jealous because she is finally finding her footing while you sit alone in that big empty house." I let out a short, harsh laugh. It sounded entirely devoid of humor. "She is not meeting investors, Dad. I have a real-time GPS tracker hardwired into the dashboard. She is currently doing 100 miles per hour down the interstate, heading directly for the warehouse district. She is going to the underground casino." Again. Silence hung heavy on the line. I could hear the faint sound of the television announcer in the background, but Roland was entirely speechless. "She took my property without my consent," I continued, my voice sharp and precise like a scalpel. "But that is a civil matter between you, me, and the insurance company. The real problem, Dad, is that Kinsley is wearing a GPS ankle monitor. She is on strict federal probation. She is legally barred from leaving the county limits without prior authorization, and she is explicitly banned from entering any establishment known for gambling or illegal activities. If a police officer pulls her over in a stolen luxury vehicle, doing 100 miles an hour on her way to an illegal casino, she will violate her probation instantly. They will revoke her bail, and she will go straight to a federal penitentiary." "Sloan, wait," Roland stammered, his voice suddenly trembling with raw panic. "Do not do anything rash. Let me call her." I will make her turn the car around right now. Please, do not involve the authorities. We cannot afford another lawyer. We will lose the house. You should have thought about the house before you cut the power to my security cameras and handed a convicted fraudster the keys to my life, I said coldly. Sloan, I am begging you, as your father. Do not call the police. I already did, I lied smoothly. They are dispatching highway patrol as we speak. I hung up the phone. I did not wait for his screams. I did not care about his panic. I swiped out of the tracking app and opened my dialer. I had not called the police yet, but I was about to make the threat a reality. I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher asked, her voice professional and crisp. I need to report a grand theft auto, I stated, my tone identical to the one I used in executive board meetings. Firm, clear, and commanding. My vehicle was taken from my secure driveway within the last hour. The suspect used a stolen backup key to bypass the ignition. Okay, ma'am. Do you have a description of the vehicle and the suspect? It is a slate gray Mercedes G-Class. I provided the license plate number from memory. The suspect is my sister, Kinsley. But there is critical information your officers need before they approach the vehicle. She is currently on active federal probation for wire fraud. She is violating her travel restrictions, and she is driving recklessly at over 100 miles per hour toward the industrial warehouse district. The dispatcher's tone shifted instantly from routine data entry to high alert. Federal probation? Understood, ma'am. Do you have a current location? I have a live satellite feed. She just exited the highway. She is pulling into the parking lot of the abandoned textile mill on 4th Street. We have patrol units in that sector. Stay on the line, ma'am. We are moving to intercept. I walked to the front window of my house and looked out into the rainy night. I had just initiated a sequence of events that would completely shatter my family. The guilt that Deirdre and Roland had installed in my brain for 30 years tried to creep up my throat, but I swallowed it down with pure disgust. They made their choice when they broke into my safe. 10 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of a local police cruiser washed over my front lawn, cutting through the darkness of the neighborhood. I grabbed my raincoat and walked out the front door. A tall, stern-faced officer stepped out of the cruiser, adjusting his heavy utility belt. His name tag read Jensen. Miss Sloan. Officer Jensen asked, looking at me with a critical eye. I understand you reported a stolen vehicle taken by a family member. I have to warn you, if your father gave her the key, this might get kicked back as a civil dispute. I handed him a plastic folder containing my driver's license, the original title to the G-Class, and my insurance paperwork. My name is the sole name on that title. My father stole the key from my hidden safe. But more importantly, Officer Jensen, run the suspect's name through your database. Kinsley. Date of birth, November 12th. Jensen sighed, keying the radio on his shoulder. Dispatch. Run a name for wants and warrants. Kinsley. We stood in the freezing rain in silence. 30 seconds later, the radio crackled loud and clear. Subject returns with active federal probation status. Restitution pending. Subject has strict travel restrictions and a zero-tolerance policy for further criminal infractions. Approach with caution. Officer Jensen's demeanor changed in a heartbeat. He looked at me, realizing I was not a hysterical sibling having a petty argument over a joyride. I was a witness handing him a federal violator on a silver platter. Get in the car, Jensen ordered, opening the heavy passenger door of the cruiser. Keep your tracking app open. We're going to get your car back. I climbed into the heavy passenger seat of the police cruiser. The interior smelled sharply of stale coffee, damp uniforms, and metallic equipment. It was a stark contrast to the luxurious leather and pristine air of my G-Class, but right now, this cruiser felt like a chariot of justice. Officer Jensen hit the gas, the powerful engine roaring to life, but he kept the sirens off to maintain the element of surprise. Guide me in, Jensen said, his eyes fixed on the slick, rain-soaked road. I held my phone up, watching the bright blue dot pulse steadily on the dark map. She is stationary now. She parked in the rear lot of the old textile mill. It is right on the edge of the county line. We drove fast, weaving efficiently through the sparse late-night traffic. My mind was racing, calculating the potential damage to my vehicle, the legal fallout, and the inevitable explosion of wrath from my parents. But beneath the anxiety, there was a profound, undeniable sense of empowerment. For the very first time in my entire life, I was not cleaning up Kinsley's mess. I was exposing it to the harsh, unforgiving light of reality. We turned onto the crumbling asphalt of the industrial district. The area was a wasteland of abandoned warehouses, chain-link fences, and flickering, dying streetlights. It was exactly the kind of place you go when you want to disappear from the law. Jensen killed the headlights of the cruiser as we rolled silently down a narrow alleyway connecting to the rear parking lot of the mill. He brought the car to a stop in the deep shadows behind a rusted dumpster, giving us a perfect vantage point. And there it was. My $150,000 Mercedes G-Class. It looked entirely alien in this filthy, desolate environment. It was a flawless, slate-gray monolith gleaming under the weak yellow glow of a single unbroken security light. And to make matters infinitely worse, Kinsley had parked it diagonally, taking up two clearly marked handicap spaces right near the rusted metal side door of the warehouse. My sister was leaning casually against the driver's side door. She was wearing a skin-tight designer dress that I instantly recognized as one she had bought using Roland's credit card, paired with ridiculously high stiletto heels nom de non-haute. She was laughing loudly, tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair, talking to a large, heavily tattooed man in a leather jacket. As I watched from the darkness of the cruiser, my stomach tied itself into a heavy, suffocating knot. Kinsley lifted her foot and casually scraped the sharp, jewel-encrusted heel of her stiletto directly against the pristine, hand-polished paint of my driver's side door. She was using my luxury vehicle as a leaning post, actively trying to scratch the only flawless thing I owned while flirting with a criminal. I felt a surge of pure, unfiltered, blinding rage. It was not just a car to me. It was every missed vacation, every late night in the office, every weekend I spent grinding over spreadsheets while she partied on my parents' dime. She was treating the ultimate symbol of my relentless hard work like a cheap, disposable toy. That is her, I told Jensen, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. I pointed through the rain-streaked windshield. And that is my vehicle. She is scratching the paint right now. Jensen narrowed his eyes, observing the scene with the practiced gaze of a veteran cop. He recognized the arrogant, entitled body language immediately. Stay in the vehicle until I secure the scene, Miss Sloan. Do not step out until I give you the all-clear. Jensen threw his door open and simultaneously slammed his hand down on the emergency light bar control. The dark, grimy parking lot erupted into a blinding, chaotic storm of red and blue strobe lights. The sudden illumination bounced violently off the brick walls and the wet pavement. Jensen hit the siren for a split second, a deafening, sharp chirp that cut through the damp night air like a physical blade. Kinsley shrieked, jumping violently away from the car. She stumbled on her high heels and nearly fell into a muddy puddle. The tattooed man she was talking to did not stick around to ask questions. He bolted instantly, sprinting toward the alleyway and disappearing into the darkness. Kinsley did not run. She stood there, squinting into the glaring police lights, raising a hand to shield her eyes. She did not look afraid. She looked incredibly inconvenienced and annoyed. She looked exactly like a woman who is used to her parents paying a lawyer to make the consequences simply vanish. "Police!" Jensen shouted, using the heavy door of the cruiser as a ballistic shield, his hand resting firmly on his holstered weapon. "Step away from the vehicle right now. Let me see your hands. Put them where I can see them. Are you serious right now?" Kinsley yelled back, her voice dripping with that arrogant, deeply entitled attitude I despised so much. She crossed her arms defensively, refusing to raise her hands. "Do you know how much this dress costs? I am not standing in the rain. What is your problem? I am just talking to a friend. Step away from the vehicle and place your hands flat on the hood. Do it now," Jensen commanded, his voice echoing loudly across the empty lot. "This is harassment." Kinsley shrieked, stomping her foot in a childish temper tantrum. My dad owns this car. You can call him right now. Roland. He is a respected business owner. He will tell you I have full permission to be driving this. You are going to lose your badge for this. I could not sit there in the passenger seat and listen to her lie to a police officer. I could not sit there and listen to her use my father's name as a bulletproof shield for her own reckless criminality. I pushed the heavy passenger door open and stepped out into the strobing lights, the freezing rain immediately hitting my face. Kinsley saw movement. She looked past Officer Jensen and locked eyes with me. Her arrogant, annoyed expression vanished in a millisecond, replaced by a mask of pure, ugly, unfiltered fury. Her jaw dropped open in disbelief. Sloan, she sputtered, her brain struggling to process why her invisible, boring, corporate drone of a sister was stepping out of a police cruiser. You called the cops on me? Are you out of your mind? You stole my car, Kinsley, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the tension in the parking lot. I walked slowly forward, stopping just behind Jensen. And you drove it to an illegal casino. It is a family car, you selfish bitch, she screamed, her face turning an ugly shade of red. She took an aggressive step toward me, her fists clenched tight. Dad said I could take it. Back up right now. Jensen roared, advancing quickly on her, closing the distance in 3 long strides. She is my sister. Kinsley yelled at the officer, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at me. You absolute psycho. You are seriously having your own sister arrested over a stupid joyride? I have important networking to do tonight. You are ruining my life. You ruined your own life the day you committed federal fraud, I yelled back, the truth finally exploding out of me. You are wearing a GPS ankle monitor, Kinsley. You are on federal probation. You are not networking, you are gambling. Kinsley lunged forward in pure, unadulterated frustration, kicking the front tire of my G-Class with her expensive stiletto. That was the absolute limit. Jensen moved with terrifying, practiced speed. He grabbed Kinsley by the wrist, spun her around violently, and slammed her chest first against the cold, wet hood of the cruiser, keeping her far away from the delicate paint of my Mercedes. Click, click. The sound of the heavy steel handcuffs locking securely onto her wrists was the most beautiful, satisfying sound I had heard in years. It echoed off the brick walls with absolute finality. The golden child was finally in chains. You're under arrest for grand theft auto and violation of federal probation, Officer Jensen stated calmly, his voice a stark contrast to Kinsley's hysterical screaming. He recited her Miranda rights seamlessly as he patted her down, ignoring her vicious insults. As Jensen marched to struggling, cursing Kinsley toward the back of the police cruiser, she did not look apologetic. She did not look like a woman who realized the catastrophic magnitude of her mistake. She turned her head and looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred burning in her eyes. Dad is going to destroy you for this. Kinsley hissed, spitting the words at me as Jensen shoved her downward into the hard plastic back seat. You are dead to this family. Do you hear me? You are dead. Jensen slammed the heavy door shut, instantly cutting off her toxic tirade. The sudden silence in the parking lot, save for the hum of the engine and the patter of the rain, felt incredibly heavy. I exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for 30 years. I walked slowly over to my G-Class. I took a microfiber cloth I always kept in my coat pocket and carefully, gently wiped the smudge of dirt and the faint scratch mark Kinsley's heel had left on the driver's side door. It would need professional buffing, but it was not deep. She had failed to destroy it. You good to drive it back home? Jensen asked, walking over to me. He handed me a business card with a case number scribbled on the back in black ink. I will have her transported to county lockup, and they will notify her federal probation officer in the morning. This is not going to be a slap on the wrist, Miss Sloan. She crossed a major line. I am perfectly fine to drive, I said, taking a deep breath, the adrenaline slowly leaving my system and leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. Thank you, Officer Jensen. Truly. I climbed into the driver's seat of my G-Class. The familiar, rich scent of premium leather surrounded me, a comforting embrace after the chaos of the night. I gripped the steering wheel, started the engine, and drove away from the flashing lights, leaving my sister exactly where she belonged. When I finally pulled into my garage and locked the heavy security door behind me, the physical house was silent, but my digital world was actively exploding. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a tall glass of cold water, and set my phone face up on the granite island. It was vibrating so violently and consistently that it was actually rotating in slow circles across the smooth stone surface. I had 52 missed calls. It was a relentless, unceasing barrage of text messages from my mother, my father, and the designated family informant, Aunt Rowena. The flying monkeys had been fully mobilized. Deirdre, Sloane, Kinsley is in a holding cell. A cold concrete cell with criminals. She is claustrophobic and she is crying. How can you possibly sleep tonight knowing your own sister is suffering in a cage? Roland, if you do not call the police and drop these charges by tomorrow morning, do not bother coming to Sunday dinner. Do not bother calling yourself my daughter. You are permanently disowned. I will take you out of the will entirely. Disowned. Out of the will. I stared at the glowing words on the screen and actually let out a genuine laugh. It felt like a completely hollow threat from a man who had absolutely no leverage left and certainly no inheritance to pass down. You cannot disown the only person in the family who actually has a positive net worth and a stable career. You cannot threaten to cut someone out of a will that is mostly comprised of credit card debt and a failing business. Then, a new text message popped up on the screen, and it made my thumb hover over the glass. It was from Aunt Rowena. Rowena was the family gossip, the woman who always cornered me at family funerals to probe aggressively about my salary and my real estate investments. She gathered intelligence on my finances and reported it straight back to Roland and Deirdre. Rowena, Sloane, your father is holding his chest right now. His left arm is going numb. He is taking his emergency pills and sweating profusely. You are going to give him a fatal heart attack. I hope you are proud of what you have done to this family. The old version of Sloane, the insecure daughter desperate for approval, would have panicked completely. The old version of me would have rushed over to their house in the middle of the night, begged for forgiveness on my knees, and paid whatever exorbitant lawyer fees Kinsley needed just to keep the peace and keep my father alive. Instead, I stood in the quiet of my kitchen and remembered the fake heart attack from 2 years ago. I remembered the $8,000 I dropped into a joint account to save his life, only to find out it was a manipulation tactic. I remembered his arrogant, mocking laughter on the phone just 2 hours ago when he told me Kinsley deserved my car. I picked up the phone and typed back exactly one sentence to Aunt Rowena. If he is having a real heart attack, call an ambulance immediately. Do not call me. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb mode, effectively silencing the manufactured storm. The war had officially started, and I needed to be fully prepared for the morning. Because I knew my family better than anyone, and my analytical brain was already piecing the puzzle together. They didn't just want my luxury car for a simple joyride to a casino. There was a desperate, urgent reason Kinsley needed a vehicle so badly, and there was a massive financial reason Roland was so quick to hand over my keys. I walked into my home office and opened my secure corporate laptop. The blue light washed over my face in the dark room. It was time to follow the money. In the world of logistics, when supply chains break down, you audit the paper trail. I was about to audit my own family, and I knew exactly where to look to find the bodies they had buried. They threatened to disown me. They didn't realize you can't fire someone who already quit a decade ago. The next morning, I called my executive assistant at the corporate office and formally requested 2 days of personal leave. It was literally the first time I had called out of work in 4 years, but I needed absolute, undivided focus. I brewed a massive pot of strong black coffee and sat down at my home office desk, surrounded by my dual monitors. I needed immediate access to public court records and deep financial filings. As a director of supply chain logistics, I had access to premium background check software that we used to vet massive international vendors. I logged into the system, typed in my parents' names, and started pulling data. I fully expected to see the details of Kinsley's federal probation and maybe some unpaid parking tickets. What I did not expect to see was a trail of financial devastation so severe it made my stomach churn. I opened the first encrypted file. It was a vehicle registration and title transfer report for Deirdre's car. A month ago, my mother had called me, sobbing uncontrollably, complaining that her reliable sedan was in the shop for a massive transmission failure that would take weeks to fix. She had strongly hinted that I should buy her a new one, which I refused. It was a complete lie. The public record showed that Deirdre's sedan was not in a repair shop. It had been legally transferred to a local scrapyard and sold for salvage. But why would she scrap a perfectly functioning car? I dug deeper into the federal court database, matching dates. 3 days before the car was sold for scrap, the federal court handling Kinsley's wire fraud case had issued a final, non-negotiable demand for her victim restitution payment. The amount was exactly $18,000. If the payment was not made within 72 hours, Kinsley's probation would be revoked and she would be sent to prison. My parents had panicked. They did not have $18,000 in cash. So, they sold my mother's only vehicle to a salvage yard for quick cash to pay off Kinsley's federal fine, saving the golden child from a prison cell. That is exactly why they desperately needed my G-Class. Deirdre was grounded, Roland's work truck was falling apart, and Kinsley needed a way to get to her illegal casino games. They were entirely willing to let a convicted felon drive my $150,000 asset because they had bankrupted themselves to protect her. But there was still another puzzle piece missing. The sold car explained the desperate need for a vehicle, but it did not explain the sheer panic in Roland's voice when I threatened to involve the police. It didn't explain the urgency of the texts. I grabbed my secure banking token and logged into the online portal for the joint emergency account I shared with Roland. The account where I had deposited $8,000 for his heart condition. I clicked on the detailed transaction history. The screen loaded. I stared at the bold number at the very top of the page. Available balance, $14. My entire $8,000 emergency fund was gone. Evaporated. I scanned the detailed withdrawal history, my blood running ice cold. The entire $8,000 was withdrawn in a single electronic wire transfer precisely 1 week ago. But the recipient was not a local hospital. It was not a cardiologist. The transaction explicitly read, wire transfer, Liberty Bail Bonds, Charlotte, North Carolina. Roland had not used my money to save his own life. He had stolen my emergency fund to bail Kinsley out of county jail for another arrest they had kept entirely secret from me. I pulled up the county arrest logs for last week. There it was. Kinsley had been arrested for felony shoplifting at a high-end boutique downtown. To prevent her federal probation officer from finding out and revoking her status, Roland had looted my safety net to pay the bail bondsman quickly and quietly. They had stolen my money to keep the golden child out of a cage, and then lied to my face about a fake heart attack to cover their tracks. I felt a cold, diamond-hard resolve settle deep in my chest. This was not just bad parenting anymore. This was not just toxic favoritism. This was systematic financial predation. And I was the prey. They viewed me not as a daughter, but as an endless, unquestioning line of credit. My phone buzzed on the desk. I picked it up. It was a new text message from Deirdre. The tone had shifted entirely from screaming anger to a sickening, desperate manipulation. Deirdre, Sloan, honey, we really need to talk. No more fighting, just family. Please come over for Sunday dinner tomorrow. Aunt Rowena will be there. I am making your favorite roast. Let's resolve all this ugliness before Kinsley's arraignment hearing on Monday. Bring the legal papers to drop the charges, and we can move forward and heal. It was a blatant, obvious trap. They were gathering the entire clan to corner me. They planned to gang up on me with fake tears, overwhelming guilt, and extreme family pressure to force me to recant my official statement to Officer Jensen. They wanted me to submit, to fall back in line, and to keep paying for Kinsley's disastrous life. Perfect. I typed back a single sentence. I will be there at 6. I spent the next 4 hours printing every single piece of evidence. I bought 3 heavy-duty professional binders. I labeled them meticulously, red, blue, and black. I highlighted the lies, the dates, and the amounts in bright neon yellow. I printed the salvage yard receipt. I printed the federal restitution demand. I printed the bail bond transfer from my stolen emergency fund. I was building a watertight, undeniable case. If they wanted to play family court in their living room, that was absolutely fine by me. But I was no longer going to play the role of the guilty defendant. I was going to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Thank you so much for watching the first half of this story. If you are enjoying the journey of bringing this toxic family to justice, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel grow, and you definitely will not want to miss the explosive confrontation coming up next. The digital trail of destruction my parents had left behind was staggering, but my analytical mind told me there had to be more. You do not send a convicted felon wearing a GPS ankle monitor racing toward an underground casino in a stolen $150,000 vehicle just for fun. There was a missing variable in this equation. I needed the whole picture before I walked into their trap on Sunday. I took a deep breath, opened a new secure browser window, and initiated a deep, comprehensive credit check on my own social security number. It was a rigorous background scan usually reserved for high-level executive clearances. The loading bar crawled across the screen. I sipped my black coffee, the bitter taste grounding me. The report rendered. I scrolled past my pristine mortgage history, my flawless credit card payments, and my impeccable score. Then, a massive red anomaly practically leaped off the screen and punched me in the throat. My heart physically skipped a beat. The air left my lungs. There was a new, active loan filed under my name, dated exactly 5 days ago. The principal amount was $40,000. It was not originated from a traditional bank or a reputable financial institution. It was issued by a shadowy, high-risk private lending firm operating out of a dilapidated industrial park on the edge of the city limits. I clicked on the digital filing, pulling up the scanned PDF of the loan agreement. There it was. My name, my social security number, and my supposed signature at the bottom of the page. But it was not my signature. It was a sloppy, desperate forgery. Someone had tried to mimic the sharp loops of my handwriting and failed miserably. My father, Roland, had stolen my identity. But the sheer horror of the document did not stop at the forged signature. I scrolled down to the collateral section of the loan agreement. To secure a predatory $40,000 cash loan with zero background check, you have to offer something of immense value to the lender. Roland had listed my slate gray Mercedes G-Class as the physical collateral. I stared at the glowing screen until my eyes burned. The realization was a devastating, tidal wave of clarity. Kinsley was not just taking my car on a joyride to gamble. Roland did not just hand her the keys so she could network. The underground casino she was driving toward was operated by the exact same illicit syndicate that ran the private lending firm. Kinsley was driving my vehicle directly to the loan shark to hand it over. They were going to surrender my $150,000 asset to criminals to pay off whatever massive, hidden debt they had accumulated, leaving me on the hook for the forged $40,000 loan and a stolen car. And the final, ultimate twist of the knife? The name of the lending firm's registered owner. I recognized the LLC immediately. It belonged to a notoriously corrupt trucking boss. A man whose fleet I had personally investigated and permanently blacklisted from my corporation's supply chain just last month due to extreme safety violations and suspected money laundering. My father had stolen my identity, forged my signature, and pledged my vehicle to a criminal enterprise that I had actively destroyed in the corporate world. The rage I felt was no longer hot or chaotic. It dropped to absolute zero. It was a freezing, profound, clinical fury. They did not view me as human. They viewed me as a shield to absorb their bullets. I spent 30 years trying to earn their respect, trying to prove I was worthy of their love by bailing them out, paying their bills, and ignoring their insults. Never again. I saved the forged loan document, printed 5 high-resolution copies, and slid them into the black binder. I closed my laptop. The audit was finished. The verdict was sealed. All that was left was the execution. Sunday evening arrived with a heavy, oppressive downpour. The weather seemed to perfectly mirror the toxic atmosphere waiting for me at my parents' house. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, analyzing my reflection. I did not dress for a cozy family dinner. I dressed for war. I wore a tailored, charcoal gray power suit, crisp white blouse, and sharp heels. I looked exactly like the ruthless corporate executive they always despised. I packed the red, blue, and black binders into a thick leather briefcase. It weighed heavily in my hand, a physical manifestation of their ruin. The drive to their neighborhood was agonizingly slow. The windshield wipers thumped rhythmically against the glass, pushing away the driving rain. I pulled up to their familiar suburban home. The lawn was overgrown, the paint on the porch was peeling, and the gutters were overflowing. It was a house decaying from the inside out, much like the people living inside it. I parked on the street. The driveway was packed. Aunt Rowena's shiny Lexus was parked aggressively near the mailbox. I grabbed my heavy leather briefcase and walked up the concrete path, the rain soaking the shoulders of my suit. I did not knock. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my original brass house key, and unlocked the front door. The moment I stepped over the threshold, the calculated smell of comfort hit me. The rich, savory aroma of slow-roasted beef, onions, and fresh bread filled the hallway. It was the scent of every childhood holiday, a carefully crafted sensory trap designed to make you feel guilty for causing trouble. Today, it just made me feel utterly nauseous. I shook the rain from my coat, left it on the rack, and walked slowly into the living room. The entire family was arranged perfectly, waiting for me like a grand jury about to pass a harsh sentence on a disobedient child. The staging was almost theatrical. Roland sat slumped in his worn-out recliner in the center of the room. He had a medical brace wrapped tightly around his left wrist and a blanket draped over his knees, playing the role of the frail, dying patriarch to utter perfection. His face was pale, his eyes half closed in manufactured agony. Deirdre was perched on the edge of the floral sofa, clutching a crumpled tissue to her chest. Her eyes were red and puffy from hours of strategically timed crying. Aunt Rowena stood rigidly by the brick fireplace, her arms crossed tightly over her expensive sweater, her eyes narrowed with pure, undiluted contempt. She was ready to strike. And sitting on a small chair in the corner was Kinsley. She had been bailed out of county lockup yesterday. She was wearing an oversized sweater, looking disheveled, crying softly into her hands. Sitting right next to her, looking incredibly exhausted and confused, was Holden, her fiancé. He rubbed her back comfortingly, clearly unaware of the monster he was comforting. The tension in the room was so thick you could practically choke on it. Every single pair of eyes locked onto me the second I walked in. Nobody offered a warm greeting. Nobody asked if I was cold from the rain. Aunt Rowena was the very first to break the silence. She always was. "You have an unbelievable amount of nerve showing your face in this house, Sloane," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "Walking in here in your expensive corporate suit after putting your own sister in a concrete cell with actual criminals. You are a disgrace to this family." "Hello to you too, Rowena," I said smoothly, entirely ignoring her vitriol. I did not sit down. I walked directly to the center of the room, standing firmly between the large television and the heavy oak coffee table. I set the heavy leather briefcase down on the solid wood surface. The loud thud echoed sharply in the quiet room. Roland shifted in his recliner, letting out a sharp, dramatic groan as if merely breathing caused him unspeakable pain. "Sit down, Sloane," he commanded. His voice was intentionally weak, raspy, and full of fake suffering. "We are going to fix this horrific mess tonight. You are going to pull your phone out right now. You are going to call the police department. You are going to tell them you made a terrible emotional mistake. You are going to say you simply forgot you lent Kinsley the car." I looked down at the man who had stolen my emergency fund, the man who had forged my signature. "No," I said, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I am not doing that. Do it right now." Deirdre wailed dramatically, throwing her crumpled tissue onto the floor and pressing both hands to her face. "Think of her future. Think of poor Holden. Do you want them to start their marriage with her wearing a federal ankle monitor? Have you no heart at all? You are a monster. I looked over at Holden. He flinched under Deirdre's loud screaming, shrinking into his chair. He was a good man, a hard-working architect, entirely blind to the financial slaughterhouse he was walking into. I am the only person in this entire room actually thinking about Holden's future, I said, my voice incredibly steady and cold. That is exactly why I am standing here tonight. Rowena stepped forward, her face turning purple. Don't you dare disrespect your mother. We know exactly how much money you make. We know your salary. You have prime real estate. You have massive investments. You want to ruin your sister's life over a stupid joyride when you could easily afford to buy another car. It was not a joyride, I said, unzipping the heavy leather briefcase. The metallic sound of the zipper cut through the room like a knife. I reached inside. They looked at me expecting a tearful apology. They had no idea they had just invited an executioner to Sunday dinner. Let's start with the lies we tell each other just to keep the peace, I announced, pulling the red and blue binders out of my briefcase. I dropped them directly onto the center of the oak coffee table. Bam. Bam. The sheer physical weight of the evidence made the heavy table visibly shake. Roland's fake groaning stopped instantly. Deirdre's eyes widened in genuine panic, and she pressed her back hard against the sofa cushions, realizing this was not the intervention she had meticulously planned. I picked up the red binder. Mom, I said, keeping my tone deadly level and perfectly articulate. Tell Aunt Rowena and Holden exactly why you are driving a rental car right now. Tell them what is actually wrong with your reliable sedan. It is in the shop, Deirdre stammered, her voice trembling violently as she looked frantically at Roland for support. The transmission failed unexpectedly. I told you this on the phone weeks ago. You're a liar, I said clearly. The word hung in the air, heavy and unforgiving. I opened the red binder and flipped to the first neon-tabbed page. I pulled out the official DMV title transfer and the salvage yard receipt, dropping them onto the table right in front of Rowena. Her car is not in the shop, I explained to the silent room, entirely ignoring my mother's sudden sharp gasp of horror. 3 days ago, she sold her only vehicle to a scrapyard for pennies on the dollar. Why? Because Kinsley's federal probation officer issued a final demand for her $18,000 restitution payment. If they did not pay the fine, Kinsley was going to prison. My parents bankrupted themselves and sold their transportation to save a convicted fraudster from the consequences of her own actions. Holden leaned forward, his brow furrowing deeply. He looked at Kinsley, who was suddenly staring very hard at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with him. Kinsley, you told me your parents were investing that money in our wedding fund, Holden whispered, his voice cracking with confusion. She lied to you, Holden, I said softly, feeling a pang of genuine pity for him. Just like they all lied to me. I picked up the blue binder. I turned my attention directly to my father, who was suddenly sweating for real, his hands gripping the armrests of his recliner so hard his knuckles were stark white. 2 years ago, I continued, my voice rising in volume, filling the room with undeniable authority. My father convinced me to open a joint emergency bank account. He swore on his life it was only for severe medical crises. I deposited $8,000 of my own hard-earned money to protect him. He needed that money for his heart medication. Rowena yelled from the fireplace, desperately trying to defend her brother, though her voice lacked its previous conviction. No, Rowena, he did not, I corrected her sharply. I opened the blue binder and pulled out the stamped bank statement. I slid the official wire transfer receipt across the table. 1 week ago, my father drained every single cent of my emergency fund. He did not pay a hospital. He wired the entire $8,000 directly to Liberty bail bonds. Kinsley was arrested for felony shoplifting at a boutique downtown. Roland looted my safety net to bail her out of county jail before her federal probation officer found out. The living room went deadly silent. Rowena stared at the receipt on the table, her mouth hanging slightly open, the realization finally hitting her. She loved to gossip, but she did not love being made a fool of. She slowly took a step back, distancing herself from Roland. You selfish little bitch, Kinsley hissed, suddenly dropping the crying act. She stood up from her chair, her face twisted in ugly, venomous rage. We are a family. We are supposed to help each other. You have hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in the bank doing nothing. I needed that money to survive. You needed that money to buy designer shoes while you were on probation for stealing. I fired back, refusing to back down a single inch. That is enough, Roland roared. He stood up violently from his recliner, entirely forgetting about his supposedly injured wrist and his fake heart condition. He was furious, his face purple with unbridled rage. Get out of my house. You are destroying this family. You care more about pieces of paper and bank accounts than you do about your own flesh and blood. I am the only one keeping this family out of prison. I shot back, stepping closer to him. I am your father, he screamed, spit flying from his lips. You owe me your respect. You owe me your loyalty. You lost my respect the day you stole my identity, I stated, my voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. I reached into the leather briefcase one final time. I pulled out the black binder. This was the kill shot. This was the moment I had prepared for my entire life. You think this is just about a stolen car, Rowena? I asked, looking dead at my aunt, holding the black binder in my hands. You think this is just about my mother selling her sedan or my father stealing $8,000? It is infinitely worse. I opened the black binder. I pulled out the heavily notarized legal document I had uncovered the night before. I slammed it down onto the center of the coffee table. I ran a deep dive credit check on myself yesterday morning, I announced to the silent room. I found a massive anomaly. My father did not just steal my emergency fund. My family owed a staggering $40,000 to a highly dangerous private lending syndicate operating out of the industrial district. Roland's face went entirely ghostly white. All the blood drained from his features. He stumbled back a half step, his legs giving out, and collapsed heavily back into his recliner. The patriarchal power he had wielded for decades shattered onto the floor in an instant. Roland went to a loan shark to pay off Kinsley's mounting gambling debts, I continued, making sure every person in the room heard every single syllable clearly. But Roland has terrible credit. He has no assets. His trucking company is failing. So, he forged my signature on a legally binding loan document. He used my name, my excellent credit score, and my social security number to secure a $40,000 predatory loan. Deirdre gasped loudly, covering her mouth in pure horror. Even she did not know the depths of his depravity. She looked at her husband as if he were a complete stranger. And do you want to know what my father listed as the physical collateral for that forged loan? I asked the room. I pointed directly at Roland's sweating, trembling face. He listed my Mercedes G-Class. That is exactly why they needed my keys. Kinsley was not going to a charity event. She was driving my $150,000 vehicle directly to the underground casino to surrender it to the criminals to pay off their debt. The silence in the living room was absolute. It was a suffocating, heavy, toxic silence. The sheer gravity of the felony fraud hung in the air like thick, choking smoke. I had not just exposed a lie. I had exposed a massive, calculated, entirely unforgivable financial betrayal. But here is the most ironic part of your entire pathetic plan, Dad, I said, leaning over the table, forcing him to look me in the eyes. The man who owns that private lending firm? The man you pledged my car to? He runs a corrupt trucking fleet. A fleet I personally audited and blacklisted from my corporation's national supply chain last month for extreme safety violations and suspected money laundering. The FBI is currently building a federal RICO case against him based on my corporate reports. And by forging a loan document with his syndicate, you just made yourself a documented accomplice to a federal target. Roland buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic, high-pitched sob of pure terror. He was ruined. Sloane, please, Kinsley begged, turning her attention away from me and lunging toward Holden. She grabbed his arm, her fake tears returning instantly. Holden, baby, please help us. You have your savings for the house. Pay the $40,000. We have to protect the family. Please, think of our future. Think of our baby. Holden froze. The color drained from his face. Baby, he whispered. Yes, Kinsley cried, rubbing her flat stomach. I just found out last week. I am pregnant, Holden. We are going to have a child. You cannot let my sister send me to prison. Holden looked at me, his eyes wide, pleading silently for guidance. He was a man drowning in a sea of manipulation, holding on to the illusion of a family. I looked at Kinsley. The sheer evil required to weaponize a fake pregnancy to extort money from a good man was staggering. I reached into the back pocket of the black binder. I pulled out the final piece of paper. It was a bank statement from Kinsley's personal credit card, which I had subpoenaed through my legal connections. She is not pregnant, Holden, I said gently, handing him the statement. I pointed to a specific transaction dated 3 days ago. This is a receipt from an upscale cosmetic dermatology clinic in downtown Charlotte. She spent $2,000 on heavy dermal fillers and Botox injections. Medical science and federal law explicitly prohibit the administration of Botox to women who are pregnant or trying to conceive. No legitimate doctor would perform that procedure on a pregnant woman. Holden stared at the receipt. His hands began to shake. The illusion shattered completely. He looked up at Kinsley, his eyes filled with profound, heart-wrenching disgust. You lied, Holden whispered, his voice cracking. You lied about a baby to steal my house savings. No, Holden, wait, she is just trying to frame me. Kinsley shrieked, reaching for him again. Do not touch me, he said, his voice suddenly hard and resolute. The power dynamic in the room had irreversibly shifted. I had brought the executioner's block, and the axe had finally fallen. You are not leaving, Holden. Deirdre shrieked, suddenly launching herself off the sofa. She completely lost her mind. She saw her golden child's primary source of income slipping away, and sheer panic took over. She lunged forward, her hands outstretched like claws, trying to physically grab Holden's jacket to pull him back into the chair. You are engaged to her. You made a promise. You have to help pay this debt. I moved instantly. I stepped directly between my mother and Holden, using my height, my broad shoulders, and my unyielding corporate posture as a solid, immovable physical barricade. Do not ever touch him, I commanded, my voice echoing like thunder in the small living room, projecting every ounce of authority I possessed. Deirdre recoiled instantly as if she had been burned by actual fire. She backed up, tripping clumsily over the edge of the area rug, and fell back onto the sofa, weeping loudly and uncontrollably into her hands. If you take one more step toward him, I said, glaring down at my parents, I will call Officer Jensen back here right now and have you both arrested for assault and battery. You know I will do it without a second thought. Roland remained slumped in his chair, utterly defeated, staring blankly at the forged loan document on the table. Rowena had silently slipped out the front door 5 minutes ago, wanting absolutely nothing to do with the criminal fallout of this family. I turned my back on my parents and looked at Holden. He was breathing heavily, staring at the floor, processing the immense trauma of the last 20 minutes. Holden, I said, softening my voice. Grab your coat. You are leaving right now. You are walking out of this house, and you are never coming back. Holden didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. He stood up straight. He looked at Kinsley, who was screaming and thrashing on the carpet, throwing a violent, childish tantrum. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the expensive diamond engagement ring he had bought her, and dropped it unceremoniously onto the coffee table right next to the forged loan document. We are done, Holden said simply. He walked past the weeping figures of my parents, past the screaming form of my sister, and headed straight for the front door. I picked up my heavy leather briefcase, packed with all the undeniable evidence that would soon dismantle their lives completely. I turned around to face my family one final time. If you walk out that door, Sloane, Roland spat, his voice trembling with impotent, pathetic rage, making one last desperate attempt to exert control. You have no father. You are dead to me. Do you hear me? I looked at the man who had stolen my money, forged my name, covered up federal crimes, and tried to completely ruin my future just to save his fragile ego. I haven't had a father in over 10 years, I said coldly, adjusting the grip on my briefcase. I just had a financial dependent. Goodbye, Roland. I walked out the front door and pulled it firmly shut behind me. The heavy metallic click of the latch sounded exactly like a vault door, locking them inside their own miserable, self-inflicted prison of lies and debt. The icy rain outside had stopped, leaving behind a crisp, freezing night air that felt incredibly refreshing against my skin. It smelled of wet asphalt, pine needles, and pure, unfiltered freedom. Walking down that driveway, away from that house, felt like exhaling a breath I had been holding for 30 agonizing years. Holden was standing by his car, looking shell-shocked. "Thank you, Sloan," he whispered, looking at me with profound gratitude. "If you hadn't shown me those papers, I was going to wire them my entire savings tomorrow morning to pay for the wedding venue. Protect your accounts, Holden. Change your passwords tonight. And never speak to them again," I advised him firmly. He nodded, got into his car, and drove away, escaping the blast radius just in time. I walked over to my G-Class, parked safely on the street. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and leaned my head back against the premium leather headrest. The digital clock on the dashboard read 8:30. The weekend was over. Tomorrow was Monday, and the real fallout was about to begin. But for the very first time in my life, I was not afraid of the morning. I was ready for it. The next 3 months were an absolute blur of intense legal bureaucracy, federal depositions, and corporate maneuvers. But for the very first time in my entire life, I navigated a massive crisis without an ounce of fear or lingering guilt. Kinsley did not get bail this time. Between the grand theft auto, the reckless driving, and the undeniable violation of her federal probation, the judge deemed her an extreme flight risk. Her federal probation officer revoked her status immediately. Faced with the mountain of undeniable evidence I provided, including the GPS tracking logs and her arrogant behavior on police body cam footage, her overworked public defender forced her to take a strict plea deal. She was sentenced to 3 full years in a federal penitentiary. Roland and Deirdre's carefully constructed empire of lies collapsed entirely, turning to ash. I handed the forged loan documents directly to my corporate lawyer and the financial fraud division of the police department. The private lending syndicate was raided by the FBI 2 weeks later. To pay off the massive $40,000 debt before the government seized their assets, and to afford their own criminal defense attorneys, my parents were forced to rapidly sell their failing trucking company and their suburban home at a massive loss. They avoided federal prison time only because they cooperated with the FBI against the trucking boss, but they were left entirely destitute. They downsized to a cramped, depressing one-bedroom apartment in a run-down town 50 miles away from their country club friends. Aunt Rowena and the rest of the extended family stopped talking to them completely, terrified of being associated with federal fraud. Without their captive audience and their favorite financial scapegoat, Roland and Deirdre simply withered away into irrelevance. At my corporate firm, the rumor mill had inevitably churned. My boss, Mercer, a serious, high-level senior vice president who did not tolerate personal drama, called me into his expansive corner office overlooking the Charlotte skyline. I walked in, holding my posture rigid, fully expecting a severe reprimand or even a termination for the legal circus surrounding my life. Instead, Mercer gestured for me to sit and poured me a cup of expensive black coffee. I heard through our legal department about the identity fraud case involving the syndicate we blacklisted, Mercer said, leaning against his massive mahogany desk, analyzing me closely. I saw the meticulous paperwork you filed to secure your assets, lock down your credit, and feed the FBI exactly what they needed to dismantle that operation. I deeply apologize if it has been a distraction to the firm, sir, I said formally. Do not apologize, Mercer interrupted, holding up a hand to stop me. I review complex risk management profiles all day, Sloan. You identified a massive, catastrophic personal liability. You gathered undeniable empirical evidence. You executed a flawless defensive strategy, and you neutralized the threat to your portfolio without letting sentimentality or emotion cloud your judgment. That is exactly the kind of ruthless, clinical efficiency I need at the executive level. He handed me a thick manila folder. It was the official corporate paperwork for my promotion to Senior Director of Supply Chain, complete with a massive bump in my base salary, a corner office, and full stock options. I had finally found an environment that respected my boundaries, valued my brutal logic, and rewarded my hard work instead of punishing me for being successful. A week later, I picked up my Mercedes G-Class from the high-end detailing shop. I had the interior heavily shampooed, the leather conditioned twice, and the exterior paint professionally buffed to remove the faint scratch from Kinsley's heel. I wanted the car to look, feel, and smell like my toxic family had never even existed. I drove home. I parked the G-Class precisely in the center of my driveway. The Ring cameras were rewired, upgraded, and fully active. The heavy steel safe in my office was secured with a new biometric lock. Later that evening, I sat on my front porch with a hot cup of black coffee, watching the sunset over the quiet, peaceful suburb. My phone did not buzz. I had blocked their numbers permanently, and the restraining order kept them legally far away. Some people will always tell you that family is everything. They will tell you that you should forgive any transgression, any theft, and any abuse simply because you share the exact same blood. They will tell you to keep the peace at all costs. But I learned the most valuable lesson of my entire life that rainy night. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, especially when they are the ones holding the gasoline and the matches. You have to draw a hard line, protect your assets, and walk away. So, I have to ask all of you watching this. Was I too ruthless? Should I have paid the $40,000 and let my sister keep stealing just to keep the peace and protect my parents from ruin? Or did I do exactly what was necessary to survive and break the cycle of abuse? Have you ever faced something similar with your own toxic family members? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about surviving toxic families and demanding justice, please do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.